Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard McCabe. I'm the photo curator here at the Ogden Museum. And welcome to this creative conversation with Jade Thiraswas and Tommy Ka. This event is in part programming for our Knowing Who We Are exhibition, which is our 20th anniversary exhibition. Jade and Tommy's photography is featured in the exhibition. In the contemporary dialogue section of the exhibition. And I'd like to start off by thanking the following patrons whose generous support allowed the museum to acquire photographs by both Jade and Tommy for the museum's permanent collection. First of all, I'd like to thank the great Seth Boonshai, whose support allowed the museum to acquire, whose support allowed the museum to acquire Jade's beautiful photograph, Aunt Natana and her blooming azaleas in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. There it is. And also I'd love to thank Mr. Stuart B. Hurt, whose support allowed the museum to acquire Tommy Ka's photograph, Titan, Hernando, Mississippi.
Thanks, Stuart.
It's so great to have them in the collection. The Knowing Who We Are exhibition was made possible through the support of the Terra Foundation for American Art in partnership with the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Jade Thiraswas was born in New Orleans and raised in Louisiana and Southeast Asia. Jade attended the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts in high school. She earned a BFA in photography and art history at Memphis College of Art in 2015, and her MFA in photography and related media at Rochester Institute of Technology in 2018. Her work has been exhibited in spaces nationally and internationally. She is a member of Women Photograph and has been selected to participate in the New York Times Portfolio Review, the Angkor Photo Festival workshops, Chico Hot Springs Portfolio Review, and was an artist in residence at the Center for Photography at Woodstock. In 2021, her work was featured in the New York Times article, Keeping Love Close, What Does It Look Like? What does love look like in a time of hate? Asian and Asian American photographers respond. Jade's art celebrates the complexities of cultural identity, community, and representation while working against a history of colonialism, otherness, and patriarchy in the documentary photographic tradition. Tommy Ka was born in Memphis, Tennessee. He is a photographer currently working between Brooklyn, New York, and Memphis. Ka holds an MFA in photography from Yale University and a BFA in photography from Memphis College of Art. He is the recipient of the Next Step Award, Foam Talent, Creators Lab Photo Fund, and most recently was named the New York State Council for the Arts and New York Foundation for the Arts Photography Fellow. He's the Center of Photography Woodstock 2023 Vision winner. He was also in New Southern Photography exhibition that we did here at the Ogden in 2018 and 2019. And Aperture just published Ka's monograph, Half Full Quarter, and it's amazing. And Tommy, we have copies in our bookstore, and Tommy is available to sign copies after this talk. I totally recommend it. It's a beautiful book. Currently, he has two solo exhibitions, Ghost Bites at Baxter Street Camera Club of New York, and I As Another, presented by the Tennessee Triennial at the Brooks Museum in Memphis. He is represented by Higher Pictures Generation Gallery in Brooklyn, New York. Tommy's art explores themes of identity, invisibility, and the sense of place. All right. So you guys, at the opening of Knowing Who We Are, Jade was there. Tommy, you weren't there. And Jade came up to me. She was so excited because she's like, oh, you hung my photograph right next to Tommy's, right across from it. We went to school together at Memphis College of Art. I did not know that y'all knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
Very much, very much.
Yes.
Yeah, Jade's amazing. Yeah. But I'm one of those that I don't remember exactly the beginnings, but I'm really glad to see you a lot through like different places through the last few years and the South, Memphis, New York, and all that. So, yeah.
Yes. Tommy was like one of the major like art stars to come out of our little art school. So everyone knew when I got there.
Yeah,
It was like Tommy. It's our art school celeb, I would call.
Well, Amy Carter went to Memphis College of Art. I mean, back then, but it was like a long time ago. I say, but yeah, no, I'm okay.
Humble.
Yeah. I'm kind of like, should we just do an intro for Richard then? I was just like,
Was that too long?
no,
Was my
I'm like,
intro too
well, we
long?
should like spout your accolades too.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, thanks, Yalvin. Well, my first question is a really big question, and it's kind of long, and y'all can expound as long as you want to on this one. Take it wherever you want. But you guys, you live between and within two distinct cultures: your shared Asian heritage, ancestry, and being born and growing up in the American South. And I was just wondering if you could speak about your family story, history, and how that influenced your art. How has it informed your artwork?
You wanna go?
Okay. Yeah, usually I have to imagine myself in like a pink tutu or something before I talk to a crowd. But I think part of the book does kind of sort of hints at my family's history, but it kind of goes back to the 1930s in China, and my great-grandparents had to flee because of a lot of things like Civil War and the Japanese occupation and just not the best quality of life. And my grandmother was almost killed because she was like the latest girl to be born in the family. So, she survived, and they all ended up fleeing to Vietnam, which was a great idea at the time. Because, there's no war there. But there was like a large Cantonese, which is the language Chinese dialect that I speak. A lot of Chinatown communities in the United States speak, as well as the Mississippi Delta, and the Memphis Chinese communities all originally came from the same region. So I love that kind of parallel, disparate distances between my family's peculiar history. And after the Vietnam War, I'm going to fast forward, my family stayed in Saigon, so my mom ended up being part of the indoctrination camp. So a lot of people who ended up staying had to be acclimated to the communist regime. And my mom was sent to clean debris in the landscape. So if you know anything about the Vietnam War, is that no one knows exactly how many landmines are still buried. So since 1973, I think until 1983, my mom did that. And a lot of PTSD from the war. And so she fled and spent about 9 months at sea, arriving in London, Ontario. And my dad's side, my step-granddad, Jesse Burrell, is in the U.S. Navy and ended up relocating my dad's side. So my mom met my dad, who already had U.S. citizenship, and that's how I got to Memphis.
Wow.
I was trying to make that like reference to how I got to Memphis, but I don't remember the song. But yeah.
And your work?
Oh man, I don't know. I started out doing a lot of self-portrait work when I moved to New York for a semester. I didn't know anybody because before then I was just making terrible pictures of my friends in the music art community. And when I started to make more pictures about myself, I just didn't think I was really interesting enough to be in front of the camera and to be able to talk about those. Well, I refused to talk about identity. I didn't want to be like appearing in front of the camera and then automatically it was read as like something Asian about it. I just wanted to make photographs that were colorful, interesting, funny. And then around grad school, it's like my mom especially started to be subjects, mostly test subjects for ideas, and it kind of it exploded into more of a unwilling sitters for my camera because my family loves me and they have to help me out because we're family, right? So they've been participating on and off through different ideas of photographs and trying to not just document our lives. And then when I start to make other work about the southern landscape and researching Chinese diaspora, Asian diaspora, and the South especially, which is apparently a larger history that I'm still unpacking. And I'm meeting people in the last 2-3 years that are asking the same thing about our histories that are really kind of embedded and invisible. I think a lot about the Transatlantic Railroad, like the completion of that, and a lot of Chinese laborers were pushed out of the photograph. Some people say that there's like one or two. It's like, yeah, out of like 100 Chinese laborers, and probably more than that, but the idea of that gesture to be pushed out of the photograph, be pushed out of the frame, I think has kind of carried through photography and how, I don't know about you, Jade, but how education, photography, history was presented to me was almost always Eggleston, Christian Berry. No one mentioned Baldwin Lee up until 5 years ago to me, and Baldwin Lee and I went to the same grad school. So there's things like that kind of affected the way I was making work, and so I don't know. Eventually, when the book came around, and I was already kind of mixing and matching my work. I don't really. I present my work on my website in very projects. I don't say series, or I like to say bodies of work. But honestly, my French artist friend Hubert, because I can't pronounce his last name without drinking. Cabarrus. I'm sorry, Hubert. But he said he likes to think of his work as everything he does, no matter how many different rules, the way he approaches is essentially it's one long ongoing body of work. And I was like, yeah, me too. That's despite the different strategies, the different cameras, and the way I approach it, it feels like it's coming from one place. So
Yes, that was beautiful.
I'm gonna stop talking now.
My family, so I ended up here in New Orleans. Actually, refer to myself as Cajun Asian because
That's so good.
because I am a part of both cultures, not just being Asian American and having that multicultural upbringing, but specifically being here in the Deep South and Louisiana. The way that my parents met actually is my dad was born and raised in Thailand and Bangkok and wanted a way to come to the West and did essentially a study abroad. He came to LSU and they had a campus, I think where UNO is now. It used to be LSU, but he went there and studied and worked. After class, he went to the shipyard in Avondale. So he did hard labor and to pay for his classes and groceries, and found a chosen family with 2 or 3 other Thai young men that happened to also be here. And the story goes that the way that my dad met my mom is they were out dancing at some disco club in the 70s. I forget the name of it. I think it's not there anymore. But that's what they say, that they met out dancing, which is really cute. And
Jefferson Highway.
Yes, that's right. That's where it was. And they started dating, and my mom comes from a really big, she's the youngest of 9 siblings, really big Cajun family from the West Bank, from Bridge City, grew up in a tiny shotgun house, and apparently they just adopted my dad in as one of their own, which was really sweet, especially at the time. I can only imagine. My dad is very stereotypical Asian immigrant father, in that he's very stoic and he doesn't really like to tell me too much about his struggles and the things that he went through as far as racism or xenophobia, which I'm sure he did, but he tries to keep it pretty optimistic and positive about his time when he first got here. And it's also interesting, the reason why he even chose to come here is because his advisor at his college in Thailand said that it might be less of like a culture shock to come. Oh, my mom just walked in.
Wow, that's really loud.
That it might be less of a culture shock to come to the south, to Louisiana, because of the hot and humid climate and the spicy seafood. So it's similar kind of to Southeast Asia and Vietnam as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then my dad actually was and is a photographer himself, more of like a hobbyist kind of photographer. But I grew up with, as a baby, just having it like the camera handed to me, and it became like second nature just to like learn how to shoot on 35 millimeter and loading film. And I think it became very much more like an emotionally something that I wanted to take on as a serious like endeavor. When we got impacted from Hurricane Katrina, and we had a lot of water damage from my dad's film and like his snapshots from like when he first came to the U.S. and seeing like the preciousness of like those memories and how the tangibility of how they could just easily be like damaged or erased. I think that's like the moment where I was like, oh, this is something I want to like really devote my life to like the power of taking an image of something and like telling a story with it, or using it as a language to communicate. And then from there, I got to go to a really amazing art conservatory high school we have here, New Orleans Center for Creative Art. And as soon as I got into the dark room there, we had to take classes in like painting, drawing, sculpture. It was amazing. It is amazing. And now I work there part-time, which is a dream come true. But when I first got into the dark room, it was like, it was magic, that magical moment where I'm like, this is what I want to do, and I love it. And that's just the beginning.
That's great. That was awesome, both you guys. And I'll just kind of piggyback on that idea of family. Jade, picture back there. The series you're seeing, that's 3 series that we're projecting from Jade's, and I'm not going to try to explain Tommy's series, and we had this conversation last night, because they kind of blend into each other, and there's subtitles and subheadings, and they're like Jim Jarmusch's film, Mystery Train, or something like that, and it's just this free-form, amazing thing. And the book is like that too, which we'll talk about a little bit later, maybe. But Jade, so your work, there's 3 distinct bodies of work we're projecting. One is what we call Tiger Bomb, which is a series you're doing about your family here in Louisiana. Then there's another series called Memphis LARP, which is about the Memphis Overton Park kids in live action role playing. And then there's another series called Young Cash Curran about refugees from Miramar in Rochester, New York. And the thing that kind of gels all those 3 series together is the idea of family, traditional family, ethnic family, bonding through a game.
Yes.
So, I mean, that runs through all your work. So, I mean, that's just something that's really interesting.
Yes, definitely. I that's a good thread that I'm definitely drawn to, like communities of some sort, like even if it's happens just through blood or just through something that people are interested in. As far as like the LARPing is, they would get together, they still do, but once a week they would get together and put on their different garb and handmade weapons, and there's like rules to the game and different positions. I don't know like the extent of how the game goes on, but I just love to watch them come together and just, the thing that specifically really interested me is how it was like all ages. There was like kids from like 10 to 12 to adults that were like in their 40s. And when they played the game, everyone was just like, it was a universal kind of sentiment of we're all here to have fun and forget about like the worries and like the outside, our jobs, our school, and that kind of thing. That community, that pureness of community is something that is so beautiful to me that I always really try to capture visually.
And then young Cash, current.
Yes. That project I happened to start when I was in Rochester, New York, which has a lot of history also as well with photography. That's where the Kodak headquarters are. So being there, there's always a feeling of like the history of what has happened there. And then there's a really it's one of those cities, there's many, but Rochester as well as like Buffalo and Syracuse are sanctuary cities where during the Obama administration, they were inviting in and funding and supporting refugees from war-torn countries to come and live and getting them resettled with housing and setting them up with jobs, which is beautiful. But I had no idea, honestly, about this specific community of refugees from Southeast Asia, from Myanmar, until I happened to come across them one day. I was at a park and I had my camera and I was feeling pretty uninspired because being up there in upstate New York is like the direct opposite of New Orleans and the rich culture we have here, and I felt so out of place and was away from my family and just felt very alienated. And it was like a magical moment when I saw the young men from this project. They were playing this sport that they play in Myanmar with a little wicker ball, and it's like a cross of like volleyball and soccer. It's like volleyball, but they use their feet. It's really interesting. They do like kick flips. But I saw them and I immediately knew, I'm like, oh, those are my people. They are definitely from Southeast Asia, but I'm not sure exactly where. I approached them and found out they were, they initially introduced themselves as Thai, but it's only because they actually grew up in refugee camps in Thailand, and because their parents had to escape the genocide that's happened and still ongoing right now in Myanmar, and they are part of a ethnic minority, the Karen, that has been for many decades, since like shortly after World War II, have been getting ethnically cleansed, and their villages have been destroyed. And yeah, but their culture is very beautiful, and they're an indigenous culture of Asia, and so it's so important, like theirs and the other ones, like to keep that alive and documented. So that's pretty much the goal of this project, and as well as just like raising awareness of it as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful project. And Tommy, I wanted to go back to what you talked about, and I love that about the railroad. It was Andrew Russell photograph. It's called East West Shaking Hands at Laying the Last Rail. And it's also referred to as the champagne photo, which, like you said, there's no Chinese in the photograph, and they pretty much built the railroad, sweat labor. And I was wondering how that affected your idea of self-portraiture and inserting yourself behind the camera. Both of you guys do it. I'm going to ask you about it too, Jade. But Tommy, the idea of self-portraiture and invisibility, in your work, and is that how, that idea of moving, your projects, you're in front of the camera and you're behind the camera. And this book has probably more pictures of you behind the camera that I've ever seen, and then in front of the camera. So, but it's just an interesting dichotomy how you guys you're breaking rules, kind of constructing these images and getting in front of the camera, which there is attrition, of course, in photography, but it's just very interesting.
Yeah. I guess I could start out with an anecdote. When I first got to Yale grad school, and they kind of forgot like who they interviewed eventually. It's like, so who are you again? And it's like, oh, I'm like from Memphis College of Art. Elvis. And it was kind of like seeing people's minds just kind of map it in geography, and I'm terrible at geography. And until I said Eggleston, I was like, oh, that, okay, yes, now I remember. And I feel like that's been a kind of shadow on my work, which I love Eggleston, and I love Sally Mann, and I love Christian Berry, but those are pretty much like the trinity of of this Southern photography that was taught to us at Memphis College of Art. I mean, there are definitely Ellen Doherty's history of photography that expounded a lot of the beginnings of photography and its technology, and also the things that came with it, ethnography, eugenics, and this is a good time. Photography came around like 1839, around the time of Manifest Destiny, around the time of the Industrial Revolution, and around the time where the Opium Wars happened, and that opened 5 harbor ports in China, bringing along photography with it. And a lot of the photography studios were run by European inventors, scientists, artistry, people who just had access to these resources. And it's kind of seeing it how it plays out through history, especially in the 1900s, or I think of the woman of Stoffela, I think is the title, and it's a African woman positioned in a profile. And this is, I think they're also, in London, they were developing mugshots in the late 1880s, 90s, and so all these things were going hand in hand, and kind of, I still feel like those things are playing out now, like how a lot of young artists are always going to be possessed by the past in some way, and to pay homage to our ancestors, to our artistic lineage. But it's like, that's all I really had to go on. No one really taught us, like the other Asian artists, that are Asian American artists, and the history of that. And I feel like that has been an interest in the last like 10 years, in witnessing that change of conversation. You know, in grad school, 10 years ago, I went there 2011, 2013, and we just got Glenn Reeve from The Walking Dead. I know I'm jumping around right now. That was super serious for many of us, because we get to have a Hollywood Asian actor in Hollywood that is treated the same way, and that was like 2010, 2011. Oh God! And people weren't ready or wanting to talk about diversity and representation. I didn't want to, because I think I was influenced, or trying to break out into my own thing, and trying to not make work that looks like Eggleston, and there was an expectation for my work to look like his, or Christian Berry, or Sally Mann even, and because I was from the South. And so I kind of, of course I made that kind of work. And then I quickly, and then maybe 2015, since, like, I left school and kind of was shopping around my portfolio and being told like my work was confusing by Chelsea galleries, like to my face, like, oh, I think you should probably stick to one thing, like this queer work, this Asian work, this like doesn't, like, this isn't sellable. Like, these pictures aren't sellable. And that's like the conversation people were having in 2015 with my work. And so I kind of ended up just, fuck it. I remember even like giving up in 2018. Just like, okay, well, I'm not gonna have that kind of artist career that, that elevated Stephen Shore or someone. And I, in between, I was doing my own research of creating my own artist family tree. I discovered Corky Lee, who gathered all the descendants if he could. He passed away in 2021, but he was a New York photographer. He was like the street photographer, Chinese, brought all those, the descendants of the Chinese laborers of the Transatlantic Railroad, and made a photograph on marking the anniversary of just the people, these Chinese people who came from those Chinese laborers, and it's such an amazing photograph. And just jumping off of that is like, oh yeah, let's use that gesture of being pushed out of the frame, not recorded even. And I think of my friend Emmy, I just met in 2021 as well, as I was meeting a lot of folks from the Chinese Memphis community that have been living there, and I did not know about them. I did not know about the Mississippi Delta Chinese community, and they have an amazing museum in Cleveland, Mississippi, that you can visit. I highly recommend it, and I saw, and how I discovered them, I think 2016, 2017, was through a YouTube food documentary. I think it was Bon Appetit, but I don't want to give them credit because they're terrible company, by the way, how they treat people. They're people of color, chefs of color. And it's just like seeing one of the people I ended up photographing from the Mississippi Delta Folk Institution was Frida. And she was just, in this video, my friend sent it to me, and I'm just like, whoa. She's really Southern, and then she starts speaking in a thick Southern accent. Wow, I found my people, and they've been back in my backyard this whole time. What the fuck, you know? And it's like no one has told me about Baldwin. No one's like, I went to Yale. He went to Yale, and he lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I've like met him, like I think like Howard Greenberg, and then I turned around in Paris last November, and he's like right behind me, and we like hit it off, and like. Oh, we're gonna definitely drink in Knoxville pretty soon. But I'm gonna stop there. That's like how I ended up getting here. It's just there was no one was interested, so I just kind of took it as a way to just make work for myself in the last few years.
Oh, great. And by the way, in 2024, we're doing a solo exhibition of Baldwin Lee's photography, which is unbelievable. And he has a book out. It's already in the 3rd edition. And it was published about a year ago, and we're super excited about that. And that's so great that y'all met. And he actually, that Mike Adno article in New York Times about you, Baldwin, speaking about your work, which is great.
Wow.
You know.
I have so much superstar folks. Sarah Meister, director of Aperture, Amelie, who's like a MacArthur winner, is like just gave their time to talk about me for a brief second, and Baldwin, and I'm still grateful, but it's like a lot of us are just pushing on or adding to these the borders of Southern photography or like photography in general, and like it's amazing that we've been around and made this work, and now there's this not sudden, but there's now like an interest to be looked at. Like I hope you feel the same way with your work, Jade. Like, I just before 10 years ago, while in school, no one was making the work that we were doing.
Yes, it's true.
Well, that's great. Well, you know, 2020 sucked. It still does. The pandemic, you know, had such a profound effect on society and on everything. And one of the biggest tragedies of the pandemic was there was a rise in physical, psychological, and emotional violence against the Asian community. In Jade, there was an article in New York Times, which Tommy, you were into. It was called "Keeping Love Close: What Does Love Look Like in the Time of Hate? Asian and Asian American Photographers Respond." And so Jade, you were working on that series of your family, and then the New York Times, did they know about your work through portfolio review?
Yes. I had been, being like an artist and photographer, most of the job is having to like self-manage or self-represent. And so over the years had been like reaching out to photo editors, going to like the New York Times portfolio review, and putting my work in front of the eyes of these industry gatekeepers. I don't know if we still call them that or not.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I love y'all. It's like, how much, we're still in the position. It's fine.
I feel like it's a gray area now. Like now we're like what you were saying. Like we want to be able to like cut out that kind of like power dynamic of like we want to be able to just make the work we want to make without there being someone saying what you can and can't do. I had mostly been showing the young Cash Corinne work, but over the years, and whenever I would come back to visit home, I had kind of started to want to make more personal work. having to do with telling the story of my family and our culture and community that we've made down here, because I think it is very specific, like, and it is something that still is in need and deserving of being highlighted, of like these specific like Asian or minority cultures and how they've made a home down here in the Deep South and have retained and integrated the cultures of Louisiana, of the South, and that the melding of the two is something that it's starting to get represented, I think, in mainstream media. Like finally, like there's some movies and TV shows that are starting to like chip at the ice block. But yeah, just a few years ago, it was so hard to find these kind of stories. Like you would have to like dig through archives and put pieces together yourself. But yeah, and then when they reached out to me I was very upset and passionate, and a fire was lit under me when everything was coming out, like the news, and seeing it firsthand of people being racist and blaming, like a lot of taking out the resentment and anger of the pandemic on Asian immigrants and specifically Asian elders. So I was very honored when they reached out to me, and they offered for me to shoot new work, both either upstate in New York, or I asked if they could send me down here to make it about my family. So that's what I did. I came and shot and went all around, went to Mississippi because I have some relatives over there too in the Gulf Coast. And and there was just that was like a big oomph start to want to keep working on a larger ongoing project that I'm still working on today, because it's very daunting, and it's probably the one of the hardest things is for me personally when making work about something that's so direct and personal. Like it's just so much more heavier and emotional, and I feel even more of a responsibility of how I'm going to tell the story. So it's a slow moving, I'm just trying to take my time with it. But yeah, that's kind of, the New York Times was kind of like a big start of it, but I have been working on it a lot more and trying to dive in. And it's a big reason why I actually moved back home about a year ago, because I wanted to focus on making that work.
Right. And Tommy, do you want to talk about the Memphis airport?
Oh, I guess I could talk about the Memphis airport. Oh, let me brace myself.
It's this picture right here, y'all.
Oh, man.
Perfect timing.
Oh, how do I condense this? It's a couple. So this was last year, January 2022. The Memphis airport renovated a wing because it's international, its name. But honestly, they just sent the planes to other cities that are more international. That's their secret, by the way. Sorry, Memphis airport. Well, I had to fly in there, so it's fine. So you know more. So anyway, so the Urban Arts Commission was heading up, bringing together a lot of different artists that have lived, came through, taught, are still living in Memphis, and we don't have a lot of venues or gallery spaces and if we do, there are two that commercial galleries that kind of represent the same kind of artists. So I don't know. There's not a lot of chance to exhibit with mentor friends of mine. So I took the opportunity, presented. The proposal was originally to have the kissing pictures included, but there was a little reservation to have that same-sex kissing in the airport. It's like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to do this anymore. So, and they just ended up coming back, the Urban Art Commission and the airport, presenting like, oh, what if we showed these two? And I was tired, and I was like, fine, but pay me this much. It's like, yeah, cool, thank you. So it was installed as part of there's like rotating and then a permanent, so mine was permanent. And fast forward to about like the end of February, it's up for a month. Jade, are you in that show? right?
At the Brooks?
At the airport one?
Mm-mm.
Well, it's yeah. Okay, so a lot of people I know ended up not being in the airport. That's a whole different story. But a couple of Elvis fans got really super pissed about my photograph
Yeah.
and started to make a lot of comments online. I was ignoring it because I was like doing other things because I don't have Facebook then. I still don't have Facebook. I told the airport people to ignore it, and there's just like these weird conversations happening at the beginning of March about like maybe taking the work down, and it was a little bit weird. Like I was the only out of 60 artists in this show. I was singled out for this, and I'm not the only one that had a musician. There was a B.B. King portrait also in the show that never got in trouble either, and that's not the point. But they took it down without telling me and destroyed one of the first prints. They don't like to admit that, but I will tell you, I sent them 2 prints and they destroyed the first one. And they didn't tell me, and they thought it would be okay to present for me to repropose it. So if you kept track, that would have been the 3rd time my work has been changed for this airport. And like, is it really worth it? And they were kind of expecting me to not say anything about the whole thing. And I read the press release, and I didn't agree to do a 3rd thing because it'd just be a lot more time to come up with another thing to put up in place for the 3rd time again. It's fine. And then it wasn't, because I read the press release from the airport, and they're like, oh, well, we're working with the artists to present new works. Like, well, no, that's not what we discussed, and I have it recorded. And so they tried to get away with it. I said something on Instagram, and CNN started calling me. Pitchfork is a music magazine online that also wrote about it twice.
Wow.
A lot of it just I hate the word viral, so just like it kind of went national, and in 2 days it worked out in my favor of that they ended up putting the work back up, despite the protests of Elvis fans who were continuously posting about how Elvis was being disrespected by my demeanor, that he deserves a lot of more respectful representation was a phrase being thrown around. And you tell me, is like, is it because I'm Asian? Like, just say it. Like, because I'm not white. That's the code. Like, that's, I don't know about you, Jade, but you know, there's definitely, if you're an artist of color, or just a person of color in general, there are people who are always going to say something in coded way to point out your difference, that you don't belong here. And I grew up with that in Memphis. Often it started out with my eyes. Like, I have really squinty eyes, so that was almost always the thing I grew up as. Do you want to say that to a 6-year-old? No, but I got that every day. So this isn't a new rodeo for me, and it was really completely hard to talk about this racist thing that ended up being on national news, and then to be harassed and asked about it in like 48, 72 hours continuously. Just my phone rang about it, and it just made me feel bad. I ended up apologizing to the airport for just distracting them, because it's like just the thing that we do is that it's our fault somehow that this racist thing has happened. And yeah, it's fucking bullshit, sorry. But ended up working out in my favor. But you know, at the end of it, it's like the people who complained about it never got in trouble. The airport people never got in trouble for doing. I ended up working with the Brooks Museum. We brought some lawyer in May of that year, because I still had to finish teaching at 2 schools, and this whole thing was happening and having to explain myself. And we had a panel. We invited the airport people, and they have not called me back. They still haven't called me back, and I still have to fly into the airport, and exactly this probably the gate where my work is now hanging. But it was not fun rodeo. I don't recommend getting into controversy, but you know, it worked out in my favor. But I felt bad to take away attention from the other artists in the show. That wasn't like anyone's attention, and that it just became so much bigger conversation to me that I had to say something. And to highlight that this isn't the first time Memphis has censored artists of color. There have been multiple black artists who had made murals, and the city has accidentally painted it over. There was the MLG, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water mural that my friend Birdcat painted, and people complained that it was too black. And I'm like, Memphis is like 65% black. Like, I don't think you can, like, what is there to be, like, it's just history. It's part of this, like, the fabric of the landscape. And yeah, so, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's still the work is still there, right?
It's still there. It's still there. Someone put like googly eyes on it a year ago. I thought
like
that was
everything everywhere. all
yeah,
the
I was like, there was some like fun things that people interacted with it at the end of it, but I probably won't want to do that again. But I'm glad to have said something because I think they would have just probably done it again, and I think they probably still are doing it. There's institutions that decide what art is and what it is not, and it's insane that they listen to Elvis fans, who, by the way, did not live in Memphis. And the only one that's actually probably from Memphis is me. I can show you my birth certificate. Elvis isn't even from Memphis. He's from Tupelo, Mississippi. And I have to explain myself? So,
Yeah, you also live in the same neighborhood, right?
yeah, I grew up 5 minutes from Graceland. I grew up in Whitehaven.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I love your Elvis series, by the way.
Thanks.
It's great. And
Yeah, they loved it too. A lot of the tribute artists have like come out and supported me on that. Like I always felt so embarrassed by like people I interacted with, and like I'm so sorry. Like this should not be a part of the conversation. It's like, well, it's probably because of Austin Butler Elvis movie. It's like, yeah, probably that. They're trying to save face here. But I don't know. There was some crazy stories of people trying to reach out to Riley, the granddaughter,
Really?
to say something. It got really close. And the Elvis estate, Craig Brewer, the filmmaker of Hustle and Flow, called me. It was just, everyone got involved, even the mayor. And the mayor kind of doesn't want to say this, but he actually supported taking the work down, and now he's like not saying it, and he and I aren't talking. So,
Wow.
yeah, he's still mayor.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty intense. Do y'all want to ask questions now, or we can end on that, or I got a few more questions. What do y'all want to do?
Oh man, you want to talk about what you're working on?
Yeah, I guess I could catch up on the past year. I've been here at home. I got to work on a really amazing HBO show that highlighted Asian American food.
Helen Cho.
Yes, Helen. You know Helen?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yes, Helen Cho is a producer, amazing producer. She worked with Anthony Bourdain on Parts Unknown.
Wow.
And she produced this HBO show with Lisa Ling was the host. She's a queen icon. But yeah, that was such an exciting opportunity. I got to do like behind the scenes photography when they came, and it's a whole story about the Filipino community here in Louisiana, and they were actually one of the first to settle on the little islands that are now all underwater. But they actually, the story goes, they introduced like dried shrimp and other dried fish to the Cajuns and people here. And it's not very well known, but it's an interesting story. Huh? Were they living there sometime in the 1800s, 1700s? Don't quote me on that. Yeah, there's like, I want to say 1800s because there is some early photography, early black and white photography of their little villages. So that's why I quoted that. And photography was invented 1870s. 39. Yeah, there you go.
I only have to remember that.
1839.
Thank you.
I had
Thank
to
you.
teach this so many times. It's like,
That's right.
I
you're a
hate
teacher.
that I know that. It's like, because then I know everything that was terrible that started around it too.
Yeah, Ramel Ross always says he wishes photography was invented in a Buddhist society, and it would have been,
Yes.
it would have been very different.
That's a really interesting point.
I don't know. I've seen some AI creations on that and attempt to do that, and I'm like, I don't know anymore on that. It's like, that's a little too much. I love that though. Wow. Yeah, I feel like so much of the work now is just us time traveling or being time travelers in our own way. I mean, that's what like photography is able to afford us, is like
Definitely.
not looking at the past, but not just making objects that are the immediate past, but we're active time travelers.
Yeah.
Art historians,
Yes.
curators.
Ethnography.
Yeah, I think that's why I think I'm drawn to doing working with my family and personal, because like I feel. Were you told like, oh, you can't, it's too personal, who gives a fuck?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, you know what, I'm gonna double down on this because you can't find our personal family histories on the internet. Like, and I feel that is what makes us manifest our own, because no one else can take that from us. Like, this is from our work. It works is tied into a familial lineages. I think you can't study that in our history, and I think that's like, I don't know, that's been such a fuel and jumping off point for where I'm at now.
Absolutely.
I don't want to talk about what I'm working on, it's too involved.
But yeah, going off that point, it's very true. It's just like, I mean, in a way, it's extremely just like empowering and self-affirming because of like growing up in the stories of where we come from was not taught to us in American history. I went to public school, definitely didn't learn about anyone other than mainstream and like colonization and, you know, Civil War. I mean, I could go, that's a whole other conversation, but yeah, the problematics of how we were taught about the Civil War and slavery and how it was just glossed over. And but it's just like a rewriting of the history that hasn't been told on a wider platform. And as far as like, it's like the opposite of erasure. It's filling in.
It's like, well, maybe Mad Lib is not the best description. It's like a Mad Lib, but sometimes it feels like it. It's, I mean, like I don't know. I just want to make a photograph because I think my identity as a photographer, as an artist, really expunges all the other things, but it largely informs like my Asianness, my queerness, my southernness.
Yes.
It's all part of that, and I think that's what I'd like to be seen, just as someone who's trying to do something interesting as an artist. Yeah. Yes,
and it goes to say like you're telling your story, but it is part of representation. Like the people who will see your work, I'm sure you've experienced that, and it was really magical when the New York Times article came out, how many people reached out to me to tell me like this I relate to this, this spoke to me so much. And like Jordan, who's an amazing writer here, works for the Rivers Institute, right? Actually, I'm working with Jordan at the moment to work on a commission I have with Aperture, which amazing foundation right here. With my personal family project. And when I had never met Jordan before, but actually on our first meeting, we found out how similar our stories are to here, and it's amazing. And I think that goes to show the power of storytelling and visual art and how it just like reaches all parts of like the world, even if it's like someone. I like connected with people. Hapas is a term in Hawaii of people that are like Asian mixed or like half white or like another culture. And I had a lot of people, Hapas, reach out to me after that story, and then it's someone that's just like right in the same city, and how like it makes the connections of like, oh, there's so many more of us, and we should all get together and not be like just feeling isolated and alone, you know? Yeah,
I feel like we're fishermen too, fisher people, just casting a net to see through the pictures and just drawing what comes to us. I don't know, I always describe it as just trying to speak in a slang, speak in a dialect that other people might be able to speak as well, and then finding folks like you and all that. And yeah, I don't know, there's that. Hello. Should we answer questions from people?
Yeah, I mean, that was fantastic. I mean, I appreciate y'all
oh my gosh,
keeping the
thanks everyone for
conversation
being
rolling. So we could take some questions from the audience if y'all like. We're right at 3 o'clock.
Jordan has one, I think.
My first First of all, thank you. Oh yeah, fancy. Thank you all so much for this conversation. It's so amazing that the Ogden has brought both of you here. This feels very special. My first question is for Jade, and also for Tommy too. Working with your family is an incredible, of course, is like an endless source of beautiful, rich material, particularly if you are from not from a part of a diaspora of some kind. But it can also, I think, be a challenge because I think, at least for my first generation parents, they very much wanted us to feel more American than other, and any sort of teasing out of those stories or histories or questions was and remains a kind of a challenge. And without getting too personal for either of you, have you guys experienced some challenges working with your family as your subject, as much as it has been a bloom of inspiration and beauty and healing? That's my first question. And then my second question, because I also love books and make books, I'd love to hear from Tommy what your experience of making your book was like. And did it teach you, or did you learn anything about your own photographic practice in making the book?
Okay.
As far as the mining family for work, it is very, very challenging. We actually briefly chatted about this a moment ago before. And for me personally, it's like, it's something that I've wanted to do for so long, but I've always kind of put it on the back burner. And it's definitely easier for me to make documentary work about things that I can, communities or subjects that I can deeply personally relate to, but that there's still like a separation of some sort, and that I'm not directly related. Like, even though if they, like the guys in my refugee project, they feel like brothers to me, but still it's not directly related in that, like, there's, with my family here, there's just a lot of like ancestral, like generational trauma, I would say, and just like things that I feel that in our generation we have the responsibility to like address and heal, and even just like point it out and talk about it, and not act like everything is fine. And so yeah, I mean, not to get super heavy, but that makes it very, just the weight of it all. And then to try and aestheticize that is where I get really, it makes me pause, and I hope it feels almost as like a huge challenge of like, how do I, the weight of all of this and the complexity, how do I fit all of that into like an image or a series of images? And I'm honestly still working through that. And it's been great to have I have like some mentors or like editors that have helped me, especially someone that's can look at it objectively helps, because when I look at them, I just see an image of like, or a portrait of a family member, and then all the memories come back. And yeah, it's definitely hard, but I do think it is important to push through and do, because it is something that I feel is necessary and is needed. And yeah, and it is a little harder as far as like making portraits of my family members, because they know me so well. And I like to think of myself as a good, like, I've really tried to perfect my craft of working with taking someone's portrait and making them feel at ease and natural. But then when it comes to my family, like my dad, oh my goodness, he just freezes up like a statue. And it's very, very, I'll take like a whole memory card and like maybe get one or two decent images. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge.
Wow, it's kind of similar. Like when I visit, my family immediately walk out of the room when I walk in. It's like, because they're like, oh, I'm here. It's like, oh, hi. And then they just go either to hide from me because I have the camera and I'm always like making work when I get there. And they're like, one day, it's they'll turn the tables on me. But you know, they're family; they have to love us.
Yes.
I think. At least that's what I keep telling them. It's like, you love me, right? And it's like, this is I'm holding them emotionally hostage. But it's really hard. I like that your dad passed on the camera to you. My mom also took pictures briefly, and she gave me this album, Canada 1984. God, I hope that's the title. 83, 84. And she only gifted to me about 5 years when we were taking pictures together in our collaborations. And so 2016, she presented this picture album, like really snapshotty work that any one of us in this room probably have a relative that made those kinds of pictures. And it's like, holy shit, like my mom also made pictures, like
Wow.
great. Another thing I inherited from my mom, besides her laugh, her outline. I feel like I did a puzzle where we mixed in, it's in the book, and it's like, when I finished it, it's like, oh crap, I look like my mom. It's like, no, but that's pretty much like how I've been approaching that work, is like how much of my own identity is my own, and or if it's something that comes from the past, not just my mom. And right now focusing on photographing my grandmother, who is got just dementia. And to answer the book question, it was amazing. I don't know what I did, but through the Next Step Award, it was through some anonymous nominations, and the award presented me with the opportunity to publish this book and do the show at the Camera Club of New York, Baxter Street. And it was probably the first time I had the chance to work with a photographer, editor, Leslie Martin, who's incredible, and Studio Lynn, who designed the book. And just, they designed so much of my favorite artist books. They did John Edmonds, they did Farah Akasimi's, other people I can't name right now because I'm not the one with the art history minor. Can't remember names. But it was a great process to actually have these two people really wanting to sit down and look through everything. Like I sent them like 500 pictures as the initial selects, and then like 3 months in, it's like, oh, I have way more pictures. Like, oh, what? And then it's like, I ended up sending them maybe 2,000 pictures
Wow.
into, this is like years of people ignoring me. I was like, well, this is what happens when no one tells me how to end a project.
Yeah.
But I like long form.
Yes.
And I think Leslie agreed that there was something really to these disparate bodies of work. May I see that? And there's 4 bodies of work, and I don't want to take people's time, much of y'all's
Do a show
time.
and tell.
But it combines about 4 projects. My main work that I got nominated for was the cutout work, where I photographed cardboard cutouts of myself, because I don't like photoshopping. I don't Photoshop. I don't have time for it. I already do it for work, and it's like for myself, like I just want to make pictures. So they started to incorporate those photographs, and then ended up presenting my mom's photographs as well.
Oh, cool.
Studio Lynn did the layout and scaled them in certain sizes, so anyone that's reading it can kind of sort of subconsciously categorize them into their own work. So my mom's work is pretty much the same way that the size that was presented to me. Into the southern landscape, often like looking at making these colorful work. This is between view camera, digital, and like Wonder Bread, for example, is more personal memory, because that was the first job that I remember my grandmother worked at, and so I just remember her smelling like bread. She couldn't pronounce Tommy, so she would call me Bambi, but we didn't have Disney, so it turns out she was actually calling me Banh Mi.
Oh.
Like the Vietnamese sandwich,
That's
like
cute.
banh mi. So that's I love this. Like there's like a personal connection. But with the southern landscape, I was really looking at like traces of Chinese or Asian restaurants and incorporating shrines that were often I'd find in my personal home. My aunts have them. A lot of restaurants, Chinatown restaurants across the country, and even like this nail salon in Paris I walked by had these shrines, and I love trying to find these things in the landscape that denote our presence, that kind of shape the work. As well as like my mom and I's collaboration together over the years. I feel like there's like maybe one more, but oh well, I can't remember. And yeah, so it was really kind of just amazing to be able to show this, and also trying to point out that the Southern Photography show that we did, that was the first time an institution or any community that actually recognized something I'd done. Like I'm very much wasn't known to make Southern work. I did, but no one paid attention to those pictures because they were more interested in the self-portrait work. And that's what I was known for. And it was really nice to be looked at in a way of being able to make other kinds of work. And Leslie and Studio Lynn and a lot of folks are seeing that there was not much of the seams between these 4 different bodies of work or anything I was doing. And that's, just having a lot of trust and just going with it. And then, yeah, and the response has just been incredible.
That's great. How many books did they publish? What was the edition?
1,000? I don't know. I think
It probably says.
Oh man,
Okay.
I was trying to look for it, but
Okay.
I think it was like between either 1,000 or 1,500.
Okay.
So yeah, but they said it, I don't really pay attention to the sales because I'm just like I'm more just astounded by being able to present work in the world. Like before 2019, like I wasn't really showing. Also, there's like a cutout that comes with the book too, so
Yes.
you could definitely wear my face if you wanted to. Yeah.
I love. Can you talk about this a little bit? How you put your face onto things. What is the concept behind that?
Oh man, I was tired of making pictures of myself, so I decided to. I was thinking a lot of Danny Gordon's and Reka Ressinger, but there's David Wojnarowicz's work with Arthur Rimbaud and those black and white pictures of someone wearing Arthur Rimbaud's Xerox face around New York City, and it kind of just happened naturally. Claude Cahun, I'm not the first person to work with masks or cutouts, but they all felt really similar to each other, the cutouts and masks. So I started to, 2015, started to make them myself. I was really hesitant because I didn't want to feel like I was ripping off Reka because she made her own, and I was like, well, I'll pay other people because I'm not crafty. So I was like, that's the difference, right? Check out Reka Ressinger's work. It's amazing. And I like what it was doing. It was a picture of a picture. It was also this kind of thing that made my body felt out of place. Like it's a photograph of a photograph in a space and collapsed through the camera, and there's something really off about the picture, and it's often my body in the picture that doesn't belong, mostly because it was flat, living in a three-dimensional world. And yeah, and it kind of was poetic. Years later, on Reddit, I came across a clip of Bruce Lee's film, 1972, Enter the Dragon, something like that. And he died before he finished his scene. So it turns out that they had an extra done his cardboard cutout of his face. And you can literally see it in the film. Like Bruce Lee died, and it's literally just a 2-second clip, and you could totally tell that's not Bruce Lee. It's just a flat picture. So that was the first CGI, was cardboard generated imagery. But I love like not knowing that history, but that there's something kind of haunting that kind of comes through, like that has define our representation, not through photography, but through representation in mediums like movies and cinema that like I wasn't aware of that. And then that was like, wow, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I love that it's not Photoshop,
Yes.
but I do love the mask too.
It was supposed to be a bookmark, but I think this was a lot better.
Oh.
Just kind of like three times messed up my question, which wasn't a question, but I'm going to try to back into it because I'm interested in the fact that was a side remark you made.
Yeah.
That Richard's show
Yeah.
was a show that represented the first time you were asked to be representative of the South rather than your self-portrait work.
Yep.
And I think that that's a problem that we have within the museum circuit, particularly since 2020 and George Floyd,
Yep.
where there's a cultural catch-up happening within the whole of the community, the arts community.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine recently was speaking somewhere, and she said that being asked to not make pictures that didn't have her cultural history, and it was like being generationally traumatized again. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate how horrible it must have been to take that on with the Memphis airport. I didn't know about the first rejection, and I'm so sorry, but thank you for fighting that fight, because it's really an important one. So that's it. It's not a question. I hate people who do that.
No, thank you for pointing that out. I think it should be said. And it's just how many artists that I don't even know about that wasn't originally in the airport show because of the content of their work. I know one of the people who weren't asked was because he's a Black queer person, and his work is very beautiful. It's very unexpected portraiture of Black joy, Black masculinity, and vulnerability. And of course, I understand like the institutions having to present things in a certain way, but I mean, I've seen museum wings have signs, so it's like, oh, like, just so you know, there's some sensitive things that might make you weirded out. And I started seeing a lot more of those in the last few years. But I think as we continue to push, like, yeah, I think it's not really up to us individually what art is and what it cannot be or can be. It's just, you know, an artist saying it is art is like, that should be enough.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and going off that, I think we're still in the midst of a precarious time in the history of the world, of course, and of art and photography and representation. Like, I remember I used to get so frustrated, like pre-2020, it really, and like I had many moments where I wanted to just like give up and throw in the towel because of like the climate of how it was and how, you know, we weren't given the opportunities, and even as far as like photography, and like they would hire, the editors would just, and it still happens a lot, but like editors would hire, you know, like white male photographers to cover stories about vulnerable communities when that's not, I don't know, that shouldn't be the norm anymore.
Oh man, I saw a lot of like older white male artists who just have a second retrospective.
Yes, I know it's still happening, but like at least there was like when we had that the racial reckoning, I guess that's what some people call it. It was like a huge like relief, like, oh, finally some people, or hopefully most people, are seeing things the way that we always have, like our whole entire lives. And yeah, it's still, 3 years later, and I do get bummed out. I think a lot of people have gone back into complacency. And yeah, there's still, and that's like a responsibility that we have as artists and as people who are shaping or influencing the culture, to keep that like momentum going, and to not give up, you know, not to let the difficulties stomp us down. But yeah, like even with especially with like us being Asian American photographers, I still get some like pushback or apprehensiveness when it comes to like the whole conversation of cultural appropriation is still evolving, and I think a lot of people aren't quite there yet as to have the language to, or even the ego death to come together and have those conversations about things aren't black and white, and there's like the gray areas and nuances of what is like morally right or wrong. And I think we're still like in the middle of that period, which is frustrating for me a lot. So
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, it comes up a lot because
Yeah.
I teach. I'm at Parsons, and I get students who are operating in a way where they can go to a gallery and get picked up, and it's like, no, that only worked like maybe in the 1990s, and I think there's still the possibility of being able to do that at finding yourself as an artist, but I'm more focusing on like the idea that we can decide the kind of artist we won't want to be at the end of the day, because like there's no way that we need to follow any templates of the past. Like it's a
Yeah.
new age. Like I think it's way cooler to just do your own thing instead of like this constant comparison or like trying to repeat things that other people have already done in a different circumstance because they probably were way more connected. I had a point with this too, but oh well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe by when we're towards the end of our careers, things will have hopefully evolved
Yeah.
a lot more.
I mean, I think about like your earlier comment too on gatekeeping, and it's like, yeah, I mean that's true. And I also want to make it a point. It's like it's not like I'm going to speak for myself. It's not like I'm asking people to quit their job and like move over to hiring people of color in the position. It's like, no,
Yeah.
that's not that at all, because that's the same conversation of how people are seeing artists of color as replacing them. It's like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
But it's exchange. If we're talking about cultural appropriation, it's like, I could tell you the easier way to look at it. It's like we're going for cultural exchange. That there has
Yeah.
to be two sides benefiting from each other, and not the
Yes.
one-sided way. That is what cultural appropriation is. Did you learn anything when you like wear a costume? Did you learn the history? Like that's the exchange that I think we should be pushing for, instead of
Yes.
like this one-sidedness of like
Yes.
display, or not just gatekeeping, but what's virtue signaling.
Yes,
Like
yes.
just because we're participating doesn't mean things have changed anything. There's
Yes.
people who I know the New York Times. I love them, by the way. So and they have been making strides to hire a lot more women photo editors I've been working with, which is way cooler because they have such a I mean they know what they want, and they have a different kind of taste than the people who are in that position, right? So
Yes.
it's not like we're asking to be replaced either, but to make room and to look for, or having other people to do that kind of work for them. Like no one's, yeah, I just don't think the being replaced or this one-sidedness is a conversation. Because I see it in
Yes.
teaching a lot, like, and that's the syllabus that I'm supposed to perpetuate. Like, struggle and you'll get probably what you need. It's like, no, it's like that's terrible. That's like that only benefits like people back in the day that doesn't happen to be artists of color. Like
Yes.
that map doesn't work anymore.
Yes. Yeah. And we're still existing in these broken systems, which
Yeah.
is something that an individual can't change. But yeah, I don't know. There's still a lot of work and like unlearning and learning as far as the language goes. I think right now, especially with like the Gen Z, there's still like that pushing of like separation, like us versus them, like wrong or good, and at the end of the day, I'm like, oh no, like that's not going to help us get to where we want to go of like equality and like working together in collaboration. And
Yeah. Praise don't pay the bills. It's like, I love it, but what do we really do? What's our work of? There's so much work, but you know,
Yes.
even us existing, that's like us sitting here is already doing the work. Like you know, like we physically to do. I mean, we are doing already important things already, but I think of Lorraine O'Grady. It's just our physical presence is like radical.
yes,
Like I'm pretty sure that people who invented or discovered the different parts of photography in France and in London and in the UK and back then, like didn't expect people that didn't look like them or women to pick up the camera or anybody besides them who were scholars and academics or inventors or artisans. You know, like they had access to these resources, and now it's in our hands, and I think it's really exciting, and I think it's
Yeah.
like we should we are setting the pace,
yes.
the tone.
I think it should all be about expansion and not reduction.
Exactly.
Yeah, like there's space for everyone. Like, I don't want to like, yeah, like you were saying, I'm not like all the white man artists, like, go away, no, like, I don't want that, but like, let's just like make more space for everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now we're having a whole political discussion.
I know they're still there. They're good. They're having shows. We're not. I mean, maybe. I don't know if I have shows coming up. So. I don't know.
Don't you have two right now?
We have two.
Well, I have the Tennessee Triennial. The Baxter Street did go down though, so maybe. Who knows? I don't remember anymore. But yeah.
Well,
Anyone else?
Anybody else? Thank you, everybody,
thank
for
you so
coming.
much.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
That was great. Thanks for expounding.
That was great.
Y'all were great. Thanks.
Hey.
'Cause I was running out of questions.
That was wonderful. The flow was great.
And y'all answered them all in a couple, which is great. So.